Hello everyone and welcome to Crimson King. Yes, I am using my voice for this time, because just doing text is not going to be the best. And this time we're going to be doing a bit of a challenge in a game. It's a Roblox game called Block Tales. Very good game. But for this, we're going to do a no block challenge, which there has only been one other person to do a no block challenge. I'll just show the video here and possibly leave a link in the description. But first, we're gonna need to discuss the rules. Rule number 1, I cannot block under any circumstances. Whole point of the challenge. And rule number 2, no super guarding. Basically a more advanced version of blocking. And other than that, it's fair game. So with that being said, let's start with the challenge. We watch the news, talk to Zombie Man, start heading our way to Roblox HQ, and we talk to our two penguin twins, Harry and Mary. We make it to the HQ, and then we have to listen to Builderman talk for a bit until one hooded figure and one, I assume, minions, to come down and tie him up and put him to the side. He ends up going on this bit of a chat of how he ends up taking things from the society, and then Builderman's so-called bodyguard ends up coming onto the stage with like 6 flips and fails horribly. Like off the stage horribly. It wasn't even close. Mary then ends up waking up her grandpa, which those who actually played the game know exactly who this is, and we will know who soon later. Ends up waking up, trying to walk the stage, and ends up asking us to fight him. But we act like we know nothing. After giving us a bit of a pep talk, we head up there, and then we fight. This fight is a bit more of a tutorial battle, teaching us the basic attacks and the one thing we're not supposed to do, blocking. But since we're required to block here, I'm not going to count it towards the challenge as it's unavoidable, which sucks. So as we actually do still get EXP from this, but I kind of wish that we didn't, because it kind of ruins the challenge a bit. So besides this one, we can't block anymore. Now back to the story. Yeah, basically he ends up calling us a bit of a coward and more of a thing. I don't know exactly, but he ends up bringing out some kind of time machine. We hit it, and then all of us get sucked to the past, all the way back to 2010. We end up waking up to Tutorial Terry, and I think you guys know who the grandpa is now. He tells us to get out of his bed, and then we have to head to Roblox HQ in the past. We go ahead and leave the room, and then we start to leave the building and start to head to Roblox HQ, which is now when the prologue officially starts, instead of the pre-prologue. Once I leave the building, I start to find the early bucks that we can find this early to get something very important. For those wondering, one is behind the bookshelf here in the library, one behind this bar in the cafe, and another bucks is right above it. Another one is in type a street light in front of the cafe. Another one is in the job center, and the other one is in the arcade. But now that we have at least 5 bucks, we can now buy something very important from this guy who's right next to the hotel, Defend Plus. It gives us +1 defense for basically when we hold it, which gives us more survivability. We talked to the guy here to get Gusto, which prevents us from super guarding, which we can't do in the first place, in exchange for 20% more EXP, which allows us to level up faster, in exchange for 0 BP, which is very helpful. Also, while doing the early part of this challenge, my friend was actually talking to me, and I told him about me doing this challenge, and he wished me good luck. We do every fight that I could in the Roblox headquarters to get as much EXP as I can, as a level up will be very much beneficial, which then I start to do the red and blue boss fight, which Shadows got beaten up, and Blue is apparently the only one out of the two that has self-awareness. So we end up fighting them because we think that we beat them up. So the fight starts, and I could have optimized this a little better, in my opinion. Like, I didn't go for the guards. What is a guard, you may be asking? Well, once you would do the second part, well, once you finish your first turn, or when it's your last turn, most exactly, you can do strategies and do guard, which will allow you to block 1 damage, which I could have done that to prevent a lot of health from being lost, which I almost died. So, thank God I didn't. We beat the fight, and then the red and blue end up running off after they lost, which then we could talk to Shaletsky. I don't know what happened to him, but apparently he couldn't even see us when we're a few feet in front of him. But apparently the one who did this to him ended up kidnapping Builderman, and he wants us to collect the 8 special swords and gives us a sword of our own so we can finally destroy the wood. However, I took this time to actually backtrack through the Roblox headquarters to grind more enemies, so that way I could get closer to leveling up. It sadly didn't give me enough EXP though, so we end up breaking down the boards and we can continue on with more fights and finding a bomb as well, which could be useful later on. We try heading to the next area, but Tutorial Terry ends up following us, and apparently we ended up leaving a card in his room, Power Stab, which actually can help us a lot, as it doesn't require any BP to equip, like Gusto, which is very useful and allows us to use our SP for something. We took out a Nooblet, and after taking out that Nooblet, we get access to our first level up, which allows us to go with a stat. I decided to go with BP so that way I could finally equip the Defense Plus, which will help us a lot. In this, since we have 1 defense, most of the opponents can't really hit us, as most of them will only do 1 damage, and guarding allows us to negate 2 damage, which allows us to pretty much stop about everything in the early stages of the game. Sometime after that, we end up fighting the next boss, which is Red and Blue again, but this time with their uncle Noobador, which this fight, it was the closest one I had in the whole challenge so far, as I wanted to take down the first 2 as quick as possible, which wasn't a great idea at the end, as the Noobador's elbow drop, which is one of his 2 attacks, can daze us. And that's a problem, and this also shows that I wasn't really that good, or at least focused on the point of the challenge at this point in the game. Because, as you see here, I'm not defending. And that's what I'm supposed to be doing in order to actually, survive. In this one, I actually have no idea how I survived. I actually wanted to try to save up my items, but actually wasted a cheeseburger because of my own stupidity. Man, this really shows that I needed to improve on the later parts of the game. We kept on going on this back and forth for a bit, until apparently somehow I end up surviving on like 1 HP. I have no idea how I survived on 1 HP, as it was supposed to do 3 damage, not 2. Either way, we take those. But this also shows that I have to be a lot more careful. But with the level up here, I decided to go with HP, as, we're supposed to try and take the attacks, so if we're going to be taking a lot more attacks, we're going to need a lot more HP to actually survive those attacks. Once we get to the cave at the end of the meadows, we finally finish the prologue and start chapter 1, which is in Blackrock. Well, first off, we start in the cave, not Blackrock. We meet Terry again in the cave. I don't know why he's in the cave, But apparently he's trying to get the card that's on the other side, which this is supposed to be a tutorial that we can use the ball to collect stuff from far away, even though I already kind of showed you that at the beginning of collecting the bucks with the ball. Either way, but now we have something that could potentially be used for more health, but if we need health, we'd most likely use the HP plus from when we level up. We end up fighting another card later in the cave called Line Bounce, which it's actually fairly solid. It allows us to hit multiple enemies with the ball for the amount of damage that the first strike ball does. However, it decreases over time, which eats the bounce all the way to 2. We start to get to a more icy part of the cave, and it's actually here where I find another bucks, which I'm not going to mention every bucks I find, because then that'll be a bit more unnecessary stuff, but if you want me to do a bit more on that, for the next part, well, maybe on the next challenge, then sure, I'll do it. We end up finding another pretty useful card, well, as well as another bucks, but the card we end up finding is Fireball. Basically, we can inflict burn on the enemy, which, depending on the opponent, will do a certain amount of damage on them each turn when we hit them with it. But the special effects on the balls has a certain chance to activate. But that's once again depending on the enemy. I decide to backtrack to get more EXP, so that way I could level up before facing the next boss, which would be the Supreme Ant. Which, it's not really hard, but I just rather have a level up sooner than later. Just in case that I would run into trouble with this boss, even though I probably shouldn't, I decided to go for more HP, just so that way we could get to a more natural 20 HP. But with that, it's time to fight the Supreme Ant. We try to leave the cave, but apparently the Supreme Ant was not having that. And apparently wanted a bit more of a special entrance, wanted us to bow to her, which, no, we're not bowing to you. You do not look that royal. I tried to do Line Bounce because I thought it would do too, but that's if we have the Hyper Ball or a first strike, which we don't. So I'm wasting that, and I just decided to go with the Fireball on the Supreme Ant, which I probably should have done guard, which well, it wouldn't really help, but she ends up spending like half her turns just summoning more ant armies, which cannot hurt us. So she could summon them all we want. Well, she want, but it won't really matter all that much. Once the Supreme Ant is down, the fight is basically a guaranteed win, as none of the ants can even hurt us. So, this is practically a win. Once we win, for some reason she just flat out explodes. I don't know what she had, but once we leave, we can get to Road Town, which this place also has some stuff that we need, which would be very vital for the fights later on. Heading behind the waterfall over here brings us to a different area, which has 1, another bucks, and 2, the snowball, which won't be helpful in this chapter, but helpful in another, which it can cast freeze. It used to be really good, but since its nerf, it has pretty much been like, I believe, a worse fire. There is also a shop in Road Town, which this shop has one of the cards that will help this run a ton. And that card being Minimize. Minimize basically shrinks them, but, well, if it does shrink them, it'll lower their attack by 2, which is very useful. So I immediately bought it. Well, not immediately, but I still bought it. And I figured that it would help us out a lot in the later game. We head to the mayor's place in order to get a adventurer's license, so that way we can head to the next area, which will be very useful and also actually allow us to progress through the story. He also said that someone named Jim ended up going missing while going on their adventure in that place, but so he asked us to head and find him on his way on the adventure, which if we actually do get a bit of a reward, but I'll mention that at a later time. We talk to the man here, we show him our ID, and then he allows us to pass into the next area and allows us to progress the story. After doing a fight in the new area I unlocked, I decided to backtrack a bit to see if I missed anything I could have collected, which after heading back quite a bit, I did realize I ended up missing something, so I'll head back there in the Chapter 2 run. I end up collecting a double cheeseburger though, and I fast travel back to Bizville to talk back to our Bucks trader, and I decided to buy 2 new cards, SP Saver and Daze, which will come in handy. Daze has a chance to make the opponent dizzy, and also does half the damage it does to the enemy behind them, but it rounds down, and SP Saver makes all the moves that do cost SP go down by 1. However, if it already is at 1, it will not go any lower. I decided to head back, well, I'm supposed to be heading forward anyways, and decided to grind some more enemies so that way, I can actually level up. We activate a switch which drops a bridge which was preventing us from progressing further, as well as fighting, another enemy, but also finding a very useful card for this run. And that card being Happy HP. Basically, it restores 1 health point every other turn, which is very useful, especially for survivability. We cross the bridge, and then we arrive at the gates of Blackrock, where the Chapter 1 final boss is held. But we can't head in there until we have dynamite, so we're gonna have to go on a bit of a detour. We face some more enemies until we end up reaching the Banished Knight, which he wasn't all that hard, as he doesn't do much damage, and we do more than him. And we have like twice his HP. So this fight wasn't really a problem to begin with. We continue to go down the road of facing enemies until I leveled up, and since I have real good cards, I decided to go with BP. Then I swapped some of my cards, unequipped the Line Bounce and Fireball to half minimize Happy HP, and since I just got 3 more, SP Saver. We flipped the switch in the shack in order to progress, but also getting another bomb. And then, possibly, it was supposed to be unkillable, but that's why we have bombs. Because this thing is practically immortal if you don't use a bomb. We defeat another enemy, do a nice puzzle, and we finally find the dynamite. As well as Terry. This man is everywhere. I don't know why he's everywhere, but now we can blow up rocks and actually make our way into Blackrock. We helped Jim from under the rocks, and since we helped him, he will actually give us a reward once we head back to Road Town. I'll mention that more on the next chapter. We break the wood in front of the gate, we blow up the rocks, and then we head into the Blackrock Castle. We defeat another enemy, bomb this guy for sleeping on the job, and easily figure out the code as this is never randomized. We also take this key as it allows us to head further into Blackrock. We keep grinding on enemies on the way so that way we could get more EXP, and then we finally make it to the statue that was labeled the hardest. Well, before it was nerfed to the ground, the sentient statue. I try to minimize the statue many times, but I wasn't very lucky with it for most of them. But once it started doing 2 less damage, it became a lot easier in actually taking it down, as it could pretty much not hurt me. After the statue pulls the Supreme Ant, we make it past it, and then we decide to go and break a window. Why did we break a window? Because it was the only way in, and they decided to shut down legit everything. We head in. There are 4 knights that try to stop us. They pull a fairly bad defense that could just be stopped by 1 bomb, but then we did it in a more unique way by destroying the chandelier. We head past the unconscious guards, make it to the armory, take another key, and then we unlock another door. Then we watch our character not know the difference between Scarlet and Rose, as apparently what was in that Scarlet bottle was able to destroy the entire kitchen. We climb the stuff in the kitchen, pick up the shrinking card, and apparently Tutorial Terry ends up taking the hat from the guy, who we then see doing the Family Guy pose. We leave the wizard dead, head into the treasure room, pick up a key, as well as a box that is up this ladder and down these chests all the way over here. We backtrack to fight some enemies so that way we could get some EXP and level up. But now that we're using more SP, I decided to get SP as this will also be helpful later on. We head through the gold door, then we head to the king's chamber, and then we head to fight the cruel king himself. Here we go. The first thing I wanted to do was to minimize, as that would lower his damage a whole lot. It would make it a lot easier for us to actually take him down, and I got a lot luckier with the cruel king than how I did with that statue. Like, why does RNG have to be against me sometimes, and the other times it's not? But now with him being minimized, he will start doing less damage to us, and that's a whole lot more beneficial to us, as the most he will do at this point is 3 damage in 1 turn, sort of. But now that he ends up doing summons now at this turn, doing guard was actually the better option, so that way I could make the crossbows no longer do any damage to us, which is very useful. But the annoying thing with them now having an additional armor that we can't go through with our sword makes it a bit annoying. I don't know why guard didn't work there. Maybe I have to do it on my first turn. Who knows, I'll just figure that out more for it in chapter 2. As by the time I'm editing this, I finished chapter 1 and I didn't do chapter 2 yet. Well, on my main save I did, but on this save I didn't do that yet. Either way, the fight wasn't exactly too hard. I honestly don't know why I did a cookie there. Like, seriously, I don't know why I did a cookie there. It probably could have been just fine if I just did it normally. But maybe, like, the damage is probably why I used the cookie, but who knows. But now, we don't have to worry about the opponents, as with 2 more dynamites, the king is no more, and we just have to deal with the archer he just summoned. And that can be quickly dealt with in 2 sword attacks, or 2 ball attacks, depending on which one you actually find to be easier or faster. And with this fight completed, we have now completed the final boss of chapter 1. The king then falls over into ice, and we pick up his dagger from his dead body, which honestly sounds pretty cool. Terry then appears out of nowhere thanks to the magical powers of that wizard hat, which we don't see him with it again after this. I don't know what he did with it. Either way, he tells us to head back to Shedletsky and also explains to us about fast travel, which you could do by opening the menu in the top right, then heading to the map, then selecting the area you want to head to, which you can see right here. Jedletsky then greets us and tells us to the right room, and we apparently meet him in a very, very messed up state. Like, Jesus. This is also a tutorial battle of how to use the swords. You need at least one bar, and then you can use the swords, which the ice dagger is one of the best ones we could get at this point, as it increases our survivability, but also recharging our SP. It it recovers both of them by a quarter, however, which it actually rounds up instead of the other one that rounds down. He tells us to get the Venom Shank from Thaniel. We start heading to West Bisville, but before we head to Turtleopolis, we stop to collect some stuff. In this building, we get a very useful card for this run, and that is the Charged Defense card. It's useless in a normal playthrough, but it allows us to take half damage for 3 turns. And I think you know how useful taking half damage when we can't block. If it's not a whole number though, then it'll be round up in damage. That's not the only card we got though. We also went all the way to the left. We went all the way to the left to visit Guru. And let's say the place he brings us is going to be very beneficial for us in this chapter and the later chapters. For those who don't know, if you can beat the king here 5 times, you get his call card. And let's say getting him on our side is very good. However, just for those who want to see that I did all 5 times without blocking, I'll let you guys watch the whole thing, or just skip to the timestamp here if you don't want to see it all. After we defeat the Cruel King 5 times, he ends up giving us his call card. We can't use it yet as we have other stuff that we want right now, and it costs a lot of SP. Now that we have everything that we want currently, we are now going to try to head to Tartopolis, which we have to get there by plane, so we asked Tutorial Terry to fly us there, and somehow he was a pilot. I don't know why he was a pilot, maybe to fly, because penguins can't fly. Is this a learn to fly reference right here? I don't know. Either way, we now start Chapter 2, and the quest for the Toxishank. Terry then flies us to Plainstown, which is close to Tartopolis. However, he wants to actually pay him for the flight and tells us we can walk away. After walking away from Terry, we talked to Kyoko, and she wanted us to join on her adventure, which, even if we say yes or no, if we want to join her, we still meet her at Tartopolis either way. We start heading to the plains, taking down some enemies for EXP, which there is a lot of enemies, until we find Kyoko at Tartopolis. But then something happens to the mayor, so we have to go and check it out. We then find the mayor being held by a gorilla, which we try and stop it, but then we end up running into Griefer, who is the main enemy for Chapter 2, and apparently wanted to get the Toxishank, which then he took off with the mayor. We take the keys and then get a flawless run in the minigame, which then we make it to the rainforest. We face a few more enemies, and then do our first boss of the jungle, the Komodo Dragon, where we start to use the charge defense. I'll just let this play out for those who want to just make sure I actually did this without blocking. If you want to just head to the end of the fight, just head to the timestamp here. This boss though could possibly outdamage us if we didn't have anything to stop it. With Venom Bite afflicting poison, which does 1 damage to us after each time they attack, and Tail Smack, which reduces our attack by 1, which will make it a bit hard to actually do any damage. Especially when they apply agility, which allows them to move twice, just like us. And that's a bit of a problem, as if we don't minimize them, they're going to be doing about 4 damage to us each turn with agility if we don't have charge defense up. And if we don't have charge defense up, they're going to be doing a lot more damage, as we have charge defense to reduce half the damage that they're doing. Like, technically we should be doing more damage to them, but since we need charge defense to do it, and Dynamite being our best option, and the fact that they apply a lower defense debuff to us, it kinda outdamages us a bit, especially with poison. Luckily, we have the Ice Dagger to have a bit of a heal for HP and SP. There is a way to do it faster, but it would require 1 turn or 2, because we would have to do those turns doing focus, which don't do any damage. Which, I'm pretty sure you guys can tell, is a bit of a problem. Especially since we're trying to outdamage this thing, so turns doing no damage is a problem. But we do have to deal with the poison though, and the lower attack stat, because we cannot block, nor dodge. I try my best to keep all my items for the more important fights, but sometimes I will have to make sure to not die by using them. Still, this battle was a bit more of a puzzle of survival, trying to figure out which ways are the best to survive, but also deal enough damage in time before we end up not being able to, survive. Like, sure, I could do defend to not get any of the status effects, but I will still take damage, even without it, and I wouldn't be able to actually be able to do any damage, because I will, skip my turn. It came a little close in the end, but luckily, with us having a charge defense, and thanks to my other stuff, And actually using a bit of a healing item back there, we were able to survive and take out the Komodo dragon, which I'll let the rest of the fight play out if you want to watch. I leveled up after the battle, and I went with BP, so that way we get closer to equipping the Call King card. However, since I need one more, and the ones I have are already very useful, I went with HP up for now, until I could get the amount I need. We get the rocket boots so that way we can move forward. We fight a few more enemies, and then we end up running into Griefer again, as he carries Marin Nathaniel. They go on a bit more of a yap session until Griefer tells the gorilla to take Nathaniel away, and then he ends up fighting us. This fight was a little more slow because of his attack able to make us not move for half the battle, which is quite annoying and makes it pretty slow, but we could still outdamage him, especially with Minimize. However, we can only be safe from one of his attacks when he's minimized. Although there is one attack that doesn't apply Gear Slow, it applies Dizzy instead, which is honestly worse, especially if combined with Slow, as if we don't get through Dizzy the first hit, we cannot do anything, as Slow will make us not do anything. So on the moves that he would use the Super Slam, which is the one that does apply Dizzy, I would defend so that way I wouldn't get the Dizzy stats effect. And usually it would also be enough to make me not have the slow stats effect anymore, so we can actually move twice. Although I would usually just get the slow stats effect back right after, which is quite annoying, as we're back down to one turn and losing half of our turns. But usually he does the cycle of Slam, Crowbar Smack, and then charge into Super Slam. If you can memorize that pattern, it shouldn't be that hard. Even if we do know that, it's still a bit of a problem, but luckily with the rocket boots doing damage on him over time, it does give us a bit of a chance to actually, do damage as we defend. But even if so, actually, I didn't even explain what Rocket Boots does. Rocket Boots, basically, it acts a bit more like a melee attack that doesn't activate, melee stuff. But it lowers their defense by 1 for 3 turns, and gives them burn for 3 turns. Once again, depending on the enemy, it would do a certain amount of damage. Griefer then ends up retreating, trying to get the Toxashank, which then we have to find a way around as our sword cannot break through the grass. So we do a classic of defeating a couple more enemies, and then we end up upgrading our sword. Nope, we do not get the sword, as Bigfoot here ends up taking our sword, gives us the Yell Dance, and runs off. So now we run after him to kill him. We grind a bit more in order to level up, and I go with BP for my level up option in order to actually use the Cruel King Call card. And equipping days as well, cause have a chance for the opponent not to hit us is very useful. We knock Bigfoot out of the tree, and now we face him, in order to get our sword back as well. So now, time to fight, and this is where we actually get to use the Cruel King Call card, which I'll still do a commentation of this fight, but I'll leave the timestamp here if you just want to skip it. Since we have the king out, the first thing I wanted to do was get Minimize off, so that way we can make sure we take as little as damage as possible. And it actually helps out a lot, as we actually were able to deflect the first attack. I then wanted to stack Dizzy, but because the Cold King card took 9 of our SP out of our 10, I couldn't exactly do it just yet, and I had to wait for next turn, which, honestly, stacking days on top of minimize, it helps us quite a bit. But, we actually end up getting fairly lucky with a 22% proc rate. Once again, for the reminder of how Dizzy works, it gives them a chance to not do their turn when they have the status effect, which is still very useful, as they cannot hurt us sometimes. But now that we're minimized, we can't do as much damage. But with Defend and Defense Plus, we actually can shrug off the Vine Swing, which could have hurted us quite a bit. Next up, passive damage, so that way we can actually do some damage over time, and maybe stack a bit of a minimize on top of it, which, once again, we get another proc. We've been getting really lucky this fight. I then wanted to do defend here because, I thought I would be able to take the attack if I had defend on. What I didn't know is that it pierces defense, so it did not matter. Either way, we won because of the bird. It also was easier than it should be because the king actually was able to do its own damage with Scepter Strike, but we also pick up this sword, and it allows us to go through vegetation, like the grass that's behind us, and I made sure to collect as many mangoes as possible. Which I didn't end up using any of them, but I thought it was nice to at least have some mangoes, as they heal for quite a bit and cure poison. I actually don't think I will use them ever on the next chapter though, because to those who have played the game, they probably think chapter 3 is where this challenge is gonna meet its doom, due to 2 specific enemies, which we'll get to that once we get there. Grind some more enemies in order to level up, do a bit of a puzzle that never changes, and then we have to go and climb up a tree. We beat a couple enemies up the tree, and then we finally catch up to Griefer. How did he even get up this tree that fast? He might as well be Tarzan at this point, since he's probably living in this tree. But for the reason why he needed the mare is that only the guardian of the swords can actually take the swords out. So he needed the mare in order to actually get the sword, instead of him just getting it himself. The fight starts, and I call the Cruel King, because the Cruel King is going to help a lot here, and he has a lot of health. Almost as much as Griefer. And then we end up going with a focus here, so that way I could get the sword energy up after he ends up attacking, but also to get SP. Throughout this fight, we don't want to see many Venom Slices, as it will do about a third of our total health, which hurts a lot. But we are able to do some things which help us quite a bit. But with his charged attack, it only has 2 damage for each hit. So with the defense plus and doing defend, we can take the entire attack and basically becoming invincible. But now that we have more than enough SP and kind of HP, minimize is the better way to go to decrease its damage output. And a bit of a daze on top, which didn't activate. But the Cruel King also helps, as sometimes the opponent will attack the Cruel King with his insane amount of health compared to ours. It's quite useful to have him take some attacks that we can't exactly afford to take. But at this point, we have more than enough HP in order to deal with Griefer, and then we finally beat Griefer, thanks with the help from the Cruel King. We level up once more, and I decided to go with HP, as Griefer isn't going to be the only boss we're fighting here, as This is supposed to be a bit more of a last twist boss fight, but like I say in the very first part, spoilers ahead, as it's a great game to see first blind. So now we have to face a plant, a very poisonous plant. Once again, we start off by calling in our good friend, the Cruel King, as we're very much going to need him for this boss fight. This time around, though, I just decided to pass the turn, which I don't know why I decided to pass the turn. Either way, now we have now the Cruel King actually takes the first hit, and it does 8 damage, which means it's going to do 7 damage to us, thanks to our defense plus. But now the Cruel King has a bit of poison, and we end up getting a bit of a burn on it. Which, because it's a plant, it takes additional damage from burn, taking 2 damage every hit. But basically every attack the plant does, it's going to do poison damage, which is also quite bad. This plant then decided to try to plant rush me, but because of my 1 defense, I am basically invincible again, and I get a bit of a minimize off. But we do still get a bit more damage off, thanks to the defense drop from the rocket boots, which is still very useful. We then attempt to go for days in order to last more turns, which we don't end up getting days, but it already has like 4 status effects on it already. It ends up going for Acid Rain on us, which, because of only doing 1 damage thanks to the minimize, we become invincible once more. Not to the big bite though, we still take 5 damage from that. I give us both a bit of a heal from the Ice Dagger, and then we end up reapplying the burn. After the Cruel King has to take a bit of some tentacles, and I having to take flesh bitten off of me, we get a bit of a burn and defense drop, which allows us to do more damage. But now it's big again. Sadly, no activations, but now we have to try and survive a little longer, which we don't end up getting another minimize, but we still end up surviving long enough thanks to the burn damage happening. But we might as well just take it out with sword as well, and we win the boss fight. Mayor Nathaniel ends up running up to Griefer, and he mentions that he is still alive and that this is reversible, which he's still quite saddened by this. He did want us to stay, but he wanted us to take this Toxshank away from this place, so that way none of them will be hurt again by it. But with us taking Toxshank, that's the end of Chapter 2. We then head back to Road Town, where we decide to collect a very important healing item that we can use later on. That, of course, being the pizza, which heals us for 50. But since we got what we wanted, we can now head back and talk to Shevletsky, which then he tells us to go and head and get the Ghost Walker from the manor that is on the edge of town, which is said to be haunted, but he says it's the charm of the place, which honestly makes some sort of sense. We then head to the train, and then we start Chapter 3 on our journey to the Ghost Walker. And for those who are wondering what happened to all of my money, yeah, let's say I wasted a whole bunch of my life away with fishing. But for those who don't know how rare getting these are, yeah, I'll just put the chances up right here. We had to sleep in order to try to get some rest before we end up getting to the manor, but apparently some people end up breaking onto the train, and now we have to stop them and the rest of their recruits. We get to our level up for this area, and I went with SP. It might not sound reasonable compared to HP, which helps us survive, but it'll make sense later. We then make it to the front of the train where we found Red and Blue, which they ended up taking out one of the guys that actually invaded the ship, which then they end up thinking that we are an invader of the train. But Blue pointed out that we look nothing like him, and that we're one of Shedletsky's, well, we are Shedletsky's followers. Another one comes up, and then Nubador tells us to help them fight, which we obviously win. Now we have to deal with Green and Purple, which Green ends up flat out knocking out Nubador, which leaves us to face Green and Purple, who are the first bosses of Chapter 3. But now we have to deal with some problems here, but also some decision making. First one being, who do we want to take down first? Those who have actually played the game, this is an easy choice. We're going to be taking out Green first, which those who have played the game know exactly why we're doing this, as Green can deal very high damage and breaks through shields with any of his attacks. So, taking out Green is the obvious choice and leaving Purple for last. Especially since when one of them is defeated, the other one gets a permanent +1 damage. So yeah, dealing with this insanely high damage already is a problem. But once Green goes down, it's easy pickings from here, as Purple cannot do nearly enough damage before we take him out. After defeating Green and Purple fairly easily, Nubador then wakes up, and then, let's say he gave him a little bit of a cold treatment. I probably should never say that again, as that is probably the worst pun I've ever done. Either way, Nubador gives us a bit of a thanks and apologizes a bit for back in the prologue, which he ends up saying that apparently Green and Purple tried to make Red and Blue into criminals, which, honestly, not exactly the best parents if you ask me, if they could have a life with Uncle Noobdor like this, which honestly, now that we talk to him here, he's quite a chill dude. With the help of Red and Blue, he ends up getting back to the train and tells us to wait for our destination, which we eventually arrive there. We walk off of the train, and then Blue and Red followed us off the train, as apparently Red had something to say, which he was accepting of our help, and they end up giving us their call card. Might not be useful right now, but who knows? We might be able to use it in later chapters. Well, there's only one chapter after this, but we'll see if we're going to use it or not. We defeat a couple of enemies until we end up making it to Tealman's Manor, where we could get the Ghost Walker, but his assistant ends up showing us around the place first. Which then we continue to follow him after he told us to not follow him. But we still decide to anyways, because why not? And he looks very suspicious. We beat an enemy and then level up, which I went with HP here, as we don't technically have anything else we want to equip currently. So just gain more HP for survival is the better move. We head further into the mansion, and then we end up finding the kitchen wizard, which, if you have been paying attention, you probably would recognize this guy as a certain someone. But he tells us that the Ghost Walker is underneath the mansion, but Tealman ends up having some entity guard it, so he would offer us that he would make something to help against it, and in exchange, we have to help him with cooking. We need dust, a spider, and a turkey, which weren't exactly too hard to get. We get another level from doing the optional fights, which we do HP once more for, more survival. We then give everything to the kitchen wizard, which gives us two things: shark fin soup and the ghost potion. The shark fin soup is a fairly good healing item, which can heal you and your allies' HP by 12 and SP by 6. While the ghost potion is a tool we can use that will allow us to phase through an attack, however we'll lose our next turn. But since we've done it, we can now start cooking. And I mean a lot of cooking to prepare for the final boss of this chapter. Fast forward a couple minutes, and then we end up almost getting a new ball upgrade. But first, we need to get through a boss in order to do it, like how we had to do it with Sasquatch. But this fight was still fairly easy, as we have more than enough damage to actually face the slasher here, as it can't really do much damage to us. With one defense, we can easily take the slasher signature, only taking 4 damage in total, and its second attack being the jump attack, we take even less thanks to the charged defense. But overall, this fight was nowhere near as hard as some of the other fights we'll have to do later on, due to some fairly reasonable things that those who have played the game will very much understand. For defeating the slasher, we can get the Hyper Ball, which allows us to do a ground pound attack while roaming the world, which, if we hit an enemy with it, we get an additional 2 damage on our first strike, instead of 1 if we hit them just by throwing the ball. It can also work like that if we hit them with dynamite in the overworld. But it also increases the damage that they will do from, instead of 1 per hit, to 2 per hit. However, I don't really need to do the optional fights anymore right now, as I reached max level for chapter 3, as each chapter has its own level cap. We finally make it to the Ghost Walker. However, we need the kitchen wizard in order to actually grab it, as people or any entity that's, a physical being that touches it don't usually go well for them. So they end up heading back to try and get the kitchen wizard, but let's say we are not the smartest person in the book. We end up waking up and we actually find Builderman, the person who we were actually trying to find the whole time. He says that he was been trapped inside the sword, aka the Ghost Walker, but apparently we need to repent our emotions or stop them, so that way our soul is pure, so that way we can actually collect the Ghost Walker and free him with it. The first one being avarice, or greed, for those who don't know what it means. We go through a couple rooms until we end up making it to the first boss, being the Man of Spaghetti Arms, Greed. Out of the bosses in the later half, this one is the easiest by a long shot. It does the least damage out of all of them, and it's a one attack that can give it a buff. It only steals our money and doesn't do anything crucial. So, this entire fight is just a cakewalk. But I can't really say the same for the other three bosses for the rest of Chapter 3. Next up, we have the Orb of Isolation, where we face the next boss of Solitude. Unlike Green, the other three actually pose quite a bit of a threat. Solitude's case, though, it's a bit interesting. One of Solitude's attacks goes completely through our defenses and hits both me and any allies. So we have to make sure we take him down as fast as we can. But the buff he gives himself is also quite a problem. The buff he gives himself will allow him to do additional damage on his next attack, equal to the amount of damage you did to him in one attack, which that alone can be quite scary. For example, I throw a dynamite at him when he has the buff, which, if you get an excellent, it will do 5 damage. If he has the buff, he will have a 5 attack charge for his next attack, and that is a lot of damage there. The spike shot already does 8, so a 13 damage spike shot is not what I want. Yeah, basically our goal is to try and survive as long as possible, while being able to take him down. But luckily, we didn't have many problems with that. Next up on the chopping block is the Orb of Terror, where we have to face one of the hardest boss in the game, Fear. Which in my opinion is one of the coolest boss designs I've ever seen, while also having one of my favorite soundtracks in the game, but I won't be playing it as I am not going to be biased for the rest of the bosses, as I'm not adding every boss music. Fear is also a hard one, as it has 2 very high damaging attacks in Shockwave and Apprehension. Apprehension does 10 damage to us if we don't have a defense plus. However, Shockwave would do 8. But thanks to the charged defense, it changed this to being a lot easier than it would have been. Oh, trust me, we would be having a lot harder of a time. Plus, I don't think anyone can really dodge Apprehension because of how small the timing is. The other 2 attacks, though, aren't too much of a problem, with Phobia, which it can summon, and it doesn't do too much damage to us, and Total Dismay, which can prevent us from doing any SP attacks, or anything that costs SP in general. But we already do way more than enough damage needed, so this isn't gonna be too much of a problem for us. which that boss would have been the end. However, Builderman here is not exactly Builderman, just more of a disguise for the actual final boss of Chapter 3, Hatred. We touch the Orb of Wrath, and then we fight Hatred, which I'm not even gonna lie, this one took quite a couple attempts to actually defeat, because this is a lot harder of a boss. To save time, I'll just show you the successful run that actually was able to defeat Hatred. But I'll also use this time to explain why Hatred is very difficult. There are 3 key things that make Hatred very difficult. One is his first attack, where he can spit out a total of 3 balls at you, which, if one of them hits, they give you confusion, which is not good as it allows you to hit yourself and makes you pass your turn. Then there's its lightning attack, which pierces defense, so if it hits us with that, it's not good. And then comes its charged attack, which can do 60 damage, which we will not have enough health at this point of the game to survive an attack. Legit, the Cruel King is the tankiest one we can have right now, and not even he can take it at max health. So, that is not a good thing. It's a requirement to use the Ghost Potion on that attack. But what makes this fight suck even more is that he can call in allies of his own, and he moves twice, just like us. Also, if you use the Ghost Potion, you also will lose the Feeling Fine status effect. So if you don't get the Feeling Fine status effect on the first or second attempt, it's not gonna go well for you, as you most likely will die during the attacks. What does Feeling Fine do? It makes it so you can't get any status effects that negatively impact you, while also getting rid of your current ones. So we don't have to deal with confusion until we have to reapply it again. But we at least have gotten really lucky with the attacks and the RNG in this fight. And trust me, if it wasn't for the good RNG, we probably would have lost this fight. And thank God for that, because this is probably the hardest fight in the whole game for a no block or dodge challenge. With all of the emotions now being defeated, we now wake up from touching the ghost brand, which we should be dead, so I don't know how we're alive, to be honest. Either way, we have now completed Chapter 3, and thanks to us getting rid of our emotions, we can now collect the Ghost Walker. And this sword right here is gonna be the best sword we can ever use, as it gives us free dodges in exchange for not using much besides sword energy. We might have lost 2 baked whales in the process, but in exchange, we got an extremely useful item and finally finished with probably the hardest boss in the whole game for us. We talk to Shedletsky again, which this time we're actually heading to a sword that doesn't have a guardian, the Firebrand, which this time it's in the Temple of the Red Sun. But we don't know exactly where that is, besides it being in a desert. So we head to the beach in order to get this fisherman to take us to the desert, and now we start chapter 4. After heading through the desert for what felt like way too long, we finally find this strange looking bottle which actually ended up housing a bit of a genie who calls himself the Great Flocky. Well, he's called the Great Flocky, but his actual name is way too long. Like, I'm not gonna be saying that as it's too long. But he ends up giving us 2 wishes, which this one doesn't even work, so we just ask for the bottle. I don't know why our character asked for the bottle, but he asked for the bottle. He didn't like our wish, so now we have to fight him. This one is sorta like Hatred, with 1 defense and can move twice, but he has half the health and is a flying enemy. This chapter is mainly a absolute pain for sword users, as they are either immune to swords, actually like all of the bosses here are immune to swords in some way, but luckily the Great Flocky doesn't have as devastating of attacks, unlike the so-called Hatred that pierces defense and gives us confusion. The only threatening move the Great Flocky has, though, is his car attack, which can only deal 10 damage to us, and it only does 10 damage if we have no way to modify our damage intake. All of his other attacks, though, are multi-hitting, so we pretty much take even less damage from those attacks than what we would have originally, which is still quite nice. But the other bosses, though, won't be as kind with their attacks, as we'll see later on. This boss isn't really that hard, as I never really got into any dangerous position with my health at any point in this fight. But with that, the Great Flocky was defeated fairly easily. He then allows us to take the ship in the bottle, though, once we defeated him, which the ship in the bottle isn't used for too much, other than possibly using it to surf across water. Well, not surf, but ride a bit of a boat across water. However, we can only do it on the wooden platforms that have the ship in the bottle icon. After quite a while, we finally make it to the pirate camp, which it took quite a long time to actually get here from the Great Flocky, but we're finally able to get here and move further on with the story where we meet Captain Trotter and his partner, Calypso. We end up telling him that we're here for the Firebrand, which he honestly doesn't care that much about the Firebrand, he just wants the treasure that's in the temple. So we made an agreement that we would join his crew, and in exchange we would get the sword. And honestly, that sounds like a win-win situation in my book. But before we head further in to try to get to the temple, we head back to Tertopolis, where we end up talking to Mayor Nathaniel to try and help out his son, which, back in chapter 2, he turned himself into a plant. He says that there is a cure to it, however, the recipe is exactly a pretty long forgotten thing. But the only reason for that is because the only one who actually knew it was the kitchen wizard, and to them, he is pretty much dead. But we do know where he is, and we know he's back at Tealman's Manor. So we head to the kitchen wizard, but he said that he lost his cookbook in the rainforest. And that's why we need the ship in the bottle, so that way we can get the chef's cookbook. In order to make the special, we needed compost and onion ring together in order to make it, which it doesn't look all that appealing. We give it to Mayor Nathaniel, and he gives it to his son, and now Griefer is back with some plant-like features, which, honestly, it does make him look pretty cool, I will admit that. And Griefer also gives us his call card, which could help us quite a lot, as Griefer is more for single target damage, but also helps us stay alive. We do the puzzles that we need to in order to get to the Temple of the Red Sun, and while you're in the temple, you get partnered with Calypso for the rest of the chapter 4. It all stayed the same until we face the next mini-boss, the Temple Guardian. The Temple Guardian can be quite annoying, as you have to take out both of his hands before you can actually damage the head. Which, both hands do their own different attacks, especially the right one being a lot harder to deal with, as its flick does a lot of damage. And for a no block challenge, like I discussed in chapter 3, you want to get rid of the enemy that deals the most damage, or otherwise you're going to end up hating yourself by the end of it. We also can't use any of the special swords because of the head's ability of it canceling them, which is quite annoying. But it didn't matter all that much in the end. This fight though was definitely more harder than the Great Flocky, but it still isn't the hardest thing we can fight in this chapter compared to the last two bosses. The head is also annoying as it has a bite attack which gives us Curse, and what Curse does is that it heals half the damage that is given to us. So we take 4 damage and it heals by 2, and it doesn't matter what hits him. The ray attack though is also quite annoying as it hits all of us and gives us all burn, which I mean isn't too bad, but it's not the best either. But other than that, the fight pretty much is nothing else as it's fairly easy. We get another level up, and I just go for HP, so that way we have a nice 50, which means that we can heal 10 HP from the Ice Dagger. But we end up now being underneath the temple, thanks to the Temple Guardian making that hole on the bridge. And apparently the entire pirate crew also ended up dying.
As for how they died, I honestly have no clue. We keep going through the bottom of the temple until we finally make it to the treasure as well as the firebrand, which our character, being the absolute obsessed swordman he is, attempts to try and get it. However, they aren't proud of that. Well, Captain Trotter isn't, because it said that it needs a sacrifice, so he believes that we're traitors, which honestly, I can't really blame him for that. We try to grab a sword that needs a sacrifice, and then we bring those two along with us, so he thinks that they are the sacrifices that we need to get the sword. But then he ends up getting crazy and takes the sword for him to use against us, and he wants to make sure he's the last one who will be escaping. This fight is fairly tricky as Captain Trotter does a lot of damage with his attacks and is always immune to either sword or ball attacks. And that's quite a bit of a problem, as with our Hyper Ball, we're able to do 4 damage in a single hit, and it might get hard to keep track of what Calypso uses. Plus, he also can move twice in one turn, just like Hatred and the Great Flocky. But he can also use the Firebrand and end up summoning other ghost pirates that can also hurt us. As for what the Firebrand does, the attack is called Inferno, and what it does exactly is that it will deal 10 damage, and it'll also give us burn and a attack drop if we get hit by it, which isn't good. And it also hits everyone, unless you use the Ghost Potion or the Ghost Walker. As for what the Ghost Pirate can do, it has the same moveset as Captain Trotter, minus the Firebrand and summoning Ghost, I think. I don't know, I never really got it that far to make sure that it didn't cause me any more problems. It has 3 HP, but a whopping 10 defense, so you need something that pierces defense or just doesn't care about it. Which there are a couple ways to do that at this point in the game, by either using Dynamite, the Venom Shank, or using the Softener that you can find back in Chapter 3, which is a sword attack that ignores defense, while also dropping the enemy's defense by 2. But other than that, it's not really too big of a problem to deal with. Captain Trotter, luckily, isn't too difficult compared to some other bosses, but there are some other things I will mention after the final boss.
Before we end up activating the cutscene for the last boss of Chapter 4, I decide to head back to Visville in order to do something. And you can actually change your stat allegations to the librarian, which I decided to decrease my SP in exchange for increasing my BP, as well as getting an achievement. But the main reason is so that way I can equip Defender, which gives us an extra defense in exchange for reducing our attack by 1. It might sound pointless, but it'll make sense. Just wait. We head back to activate the cutscene in order to fight the final boss, but then apparently Captain Trotter ends up trying to kill us both, but sadly he was the one who has met his end. But little we know is that the sacrifice had to be with the firebrand. And then comes up the last boss of Chapter 4, the Ancients, an artificial god made by all the souls in the firebrand. The Ancients can be quite a tricky fight if you're not prepared. I actually died once on the first attempt, but I head back in for round 2. The Ancients have quite a few attacks, as well as having some fairly difficult stats. They are flying, they move twice, and they have 1 defense, as well as 60 HP. The Ancients have 4 attacks: Obliterate, Blast Forth, Flame to their will, and their uncontrolled power. Blast Forth and their uncontrolled power are probably the more annoying ones, with their uncontrolled power able to afflict, to give us the dizzy status effect, and the Blast Forth attack giving us confusion, with both of those status effects ending our turn if we don't end up getting lucky. But now for the reason why I chose Defender. It gives us an additional defense, and the uncontrolled power, each of their attack, each hit it does 2 damage. But since we have 2 defense, we are completely immune to it. So we do not have to deal with the dizzy status effect. We still have to deal with the confusion status effect though, as the attack does way too much damage for us to block it all. But it becomes a little more difficult once we end up reaching the halfway mark with its health, where it will completely block our use of using any of the sword attacks, as well as giving it a permanent feel fine status effect, which means we cannot hinder it. I was able to do it, but it was not easy, I'll tell you that.
with us defeating the ancients, they just end up exploding and dropping the firebrand, which I'm not sure how it works. We pick up the firebrand, and then we finally complete Chapter 4. But just to see if I could, I decided to fight both of the optional bosses. First up, the Supreme Mosquito. I originally thought this one wouldn't be possible due to their healing and to piercing attacks, which that alone can be a problem, but it wasn't actually that bad. Although I did again end up getting low and used Griefer, it wasn't that bad of a fight. I also decided to try to do Fin Cool because why not? But this one is just straight up impossible right now for a no blocking challenge, as he does too much damage and he summons allies that either heal him or pierce our defense with high damage. So yeah, this one is just straight up impossible. I mean, you can watch the rest of this if you want, but then you'll see how much of a problem he really will be. We either A, take too much damage from the shotgunners in Finn McCool, or B, can't deal enough damage before he ends up healing it all back thanks to the megaphone guys. So yeah, this one is unwinnable as of Demo 4. But who knows, it might be possible with the future demos. Like Demo 5, 6, 7 maybe. Who knows? They might be possible in the future to defeat Finn McCool. But as of currently, he is impossible to beat. And that's gonna be it for this video. I honestly had quite a fun time doing this challenge. It was quite a fun one to do overall, as I actually got to challenge myself a good bit with this time. But I won't be able to do any more because of the recent controversy that's been going on with Roblox, and that it's no longer going to be a safer place for children. So, for now, it's not going to be much more Roblox content until this place becomes, more safe for younger ones. But until then, this one will be probably my last Roblox video. Well, my first and only Roblox video until then. I also decided to do a bit of a tier list, because why not? And the tier list would look like this. And just to clarify, I only tiered them by how easy they were at the time, not as of currently when I'm like almost max level. Otherwise, a lot of these would be lower on the list, like the Nubidor fight and some of the other fights, like the Supreme Ant would be in free dub at that point. But until next time, that's it for this video. See you all later.